What's up, everybody? Welcome to Conversations with me, your host, Jason Glaze. Today's conversation is with Casey Ross. Casey is the executive pastor at Local Church in Cumming, Georgia. He also wrote a book, Life and Faith, and today we're going to dive into this book. We're going to talk about why he wrote it. We're going to talk about expectations. We're going to talk about emotions and how they play in to our faith. We're going to talk about the common struggles of faith. And at the end, we're going to get into the church and kind of the role that the church plays in our faith. I really enjoyed this conversation a lot. I had a lot of fun talking to Casey about this. Casey's a great guy, honest guy, and I really think you're going to enjoy this one. So if you're watching on YouTube, make sure that you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the upcoming episodes. Make sure you like this video, drop a comment, share it around, do all the things. And again, hope you enjoy this one. Hello, Casey.
Hey, man. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? Thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. You're paying me so much money, I couldn't say no to it.
I got to get a loan. Yeah, so I'm really excited to have you on. I know we talked about this a while ago. I can't wait to get into your book, talk about that. But before we get started, just kind of tell people kind of who you are, just a little bit about you.
Yeah. My favorite things about me, I'm married, been married 28 years to Julie. We dated in high school, so we've been together a long time. We have 3 kids. We have a 21-year-old who's about to graduate college in December, and then we have a 15-year-old and an 11-year-old. So we're just all over the place when it comes to our kids. But I actually like my kids a lot.
Wow.
I think they like me. That you can have them on later and ask them questions about that. I don't do that. Been in ministry for 25 or 6 years. Went to college. Did not have any plans of being a pastor. Graduated college. Got a good job, and then felt God call me into ministry. Kind of. I think I was the last person to know. Everybody around me knew that apparently, and I didn't. And so did student ministry for a number of years. Then back in the early 2000s, planted a church. That was a crazy, a risk that was unlike us to take, but we did it. 3 years later, closed that church. That was a low point for me professionally, but God did great. He turned that into something really good. It really is what got us to move to Georgia back in 2008. I worked for a church called Brownsbridge then for about 4 years, and then 2012 to into 2020 worked for North Point Community Church. My title was ministry services director, which the only reason I tell you that is because I had a title no one even knows what that job means. Which sometimes it's the best kind of job to have.
Yeah.
And so my job was kind of just to handle projects and make sure things go well, they go smoothly, and deal with problems. And I'm a generalist. That was really a great job for me. I loved it. And then in late 2020, to my shock, God called me out of working at North Point to a church I had not heard of. There was actually a little closer to our house. Called Local Church. So left the place that I thought I would retire from and came here really to, first of all, think about what do we do for adults? How do we help adults grow in their faith in Jesus? That's one of the areas in all my minute pastoring, I'd never been responsible for that. So I thought, well, that'll be fun, something new and different. And then created kind of how we do that here. And then, almost a year ago, our church decided we wanted to plant more churches or find other churches and help them kind of do church the way we do it. Not that we do it the right way, but just the way we do it seems to work right now. So my job shifted to leading that team and being responsible for a lot of new churches in the future. And I kind of feel like it's this culmination of all these other jobs I've had coming together, but that's not why we came here. But I'm so glad to be where we are. Anyway, that's a little bit.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
I know we've talked about this before. It's so strange. You and I have so many friends in common.
Yes.
Our circles overlapped, but we technically only met a few months ago, and I still don't know how that happened.
I told somebody I was talking about you the other day in a good way,
Yeah.
and was like, "You're the one." I don't know how we were in the same building in the same hallways together, and we had so many common friends,
Hmm.
and you and I click so well. Like
Hmm.
I'm bothered that I haven't known you longer, but for some reason we never met.
Yeah.
Don't know
Yeah.
how that happened. I really
Yeah.
don't know how that happened, but
Yeah.
here we
So,
are.
so I want to kind of start with this question.
Sure.
Um, why are you so opposed to
Oh.
drinking drinks with a straw? Where
I'm
did that come from?
trying to think who you talked to get that information from me.
I did a little investigating. I made a phone call.
You did make a phone call, so
Yeah.
I have a really good answer to that.
Share.
So, can we just count as a counseling session as well? This is a free one. So, I'll kind of catch you up to the recently. I don't use straws unless it's like I don't do milkshakes either, just because they're not healthy. But my favorite. This is going to go. How much time do we have to talk about this?
All day.
My favorite treat these days is the frosted coffee from Chick-fil-A. You have to use a straw on that. You just have to. So I'm not
Okay.
opposed to straws when the substance in the cup is worthy of a straw. If it's liquid, I'm holding up my cup here with liquid in it. I cannot use a straw because my dad, growing up, called them sissy sticks.
That's what I heard. They were called sissy sticks.
I have vivid memories of that. We don't use them. Several years ago, so my dad died 2.5, almost 3 years ago. My dad died. He had died of dementia. So before his dementia got real bad, somehow in a conversation one day, my brother and I were eating lunch or something with my dad, and my brother told the waiter, "I don't use a straw." So I looked at him and I was like, "Wait, you don't use straws either?" And he was like, "No." He said, "They're sissy sticks." And I was like, "Exactly." I was like, this is childhood trauma for us. Like we don't. And so we laughed, and my dad was sitting across the table, and I was like, "Dad, like we don't use straws because of you." He had no memory of ever calling them sissy. He thinks it's so dumb that we don't use straws, and he's the reason for it. So anyway, my dad.
So,
It's my dad issue.
so as a counselor, I would say this does not need to be healed. This is a way for you to honor your father, and you keep doing it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, they're just weird. There's just something about it. But sissy sticks, I don't. That's it. Sorry. Yeah. I'm now going to spend the rest of our time together worried who else you've talked to. But keep going. I'll let you keep going. And
Hey, you can blame the one and only Robbie Caesar for that one.
I'll see him in a few days.
Mm-hmm.
I'll
Go.
throw some straws at him.
Revenge is sweet, right? So I want to jump in. You wrote this book right here,
Yep.
Life and Faith. I don't know if that's going to come across backwards on the recording. But anyway, it's called Life and Faith. This is it? ? To this is it. All right. So I came across this book. I think I read the book even before I met you. And one thing I liked about it is it hit me at a great time on my journey. Because, and here's why. You know, when God begins to grow your faith, obviously we start with some foundational pieces.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, my foundations, some of those good, some of those needed to be dismantled. But I had my foundational faith pretty early in life.
Yeah.
And then for probably the last 20 years, I would say that God is using, kind of the spiritual formation vein to grow my faith. Some would even say I get into like a mysticism type vein sometimes in a healthy way, not the weird way. When I read your book, what was great is it brought me back to some foundational things that I kind of had forgotten. At the same time, even stretched to me in areas that I didn't know I needed to be stretched in. And so when I closed your book, I actually had this thought, this book is for everyone. Mm-hmm. It really doesn't matter if you're a brand new Christian, just, met Jesus a week ago, or you're a seasoned Christian, been a Christian for 50 years. Mm-hmm. There's not just something in this book that can help. There's a lot in this book that can help. So somehow you were able to write a book that could create foundations for someone new, firm up and remind people of foundations that they may have forgotten, and kind of stretch them in their faith. And that's one thing that really drew me to the book. And that's when I said, I got to meet Casey.
Yeah.
So I loved it. I even loved the humor in it. I loved the story you told about your dad when he said, "Let's do lunch," and you're like,
Oh
"My
yeah.
dad does not do that. Does he? Is he about to tell me he's got a second family in Idaho?"
Mm-hmm.
Or
I was worried, legit worried. Yeah.
I mean, there's some funny stuff in there too that really kept me engaged. You, the chapters are not necessarily short, but within the chapters, they're short sections.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're legit ADD like I am, that really, really helps. So
Yeah.
I just really love the book. I guess my first question is, why did you write it? Like, what was the thought process that made you pull the trigger? Because I've written a book too.
Yeah.
I know how painful and wonderful it is. But what was the why behind the book?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you. I've learned I like the writing process. I hate this part of it. I don't enjoy talking about it. It feels like dirty self promotion. But since you're promoting it, I'll talk about it, and I like you. It's Yeah, no, thank you. It was painful to write, but I also loved it at the same time. Um, when you ask why, it's funny. The first thing that comes to mind was for a lot. I'm not your typical pastor. I don't enjoy preaching. I'll do it. Usually means a lot of people are sick and they got to me and and here I am. You get me because a lot of people are sick today. And I just don't enjoy it. In every sermon I write, I'm like, oh, this will be a great book or this will be a great article or something. So I've always liked writing. I've been fortunate to get some experience doing that. And so in the back of my mind, this is the selfish part of it. The selfish part was I want to write a book. Mm-hmm. But if I'm being honest with you, for lots of years, I had like a little notebook that I would write down ideas and I would write things. And a week later, I would look at it and go, that was a dumb idea. And there was never a book there to write. And thankfully, I didn't just start off forcing it. So why this particular book? There's a lot of different factors. One of them is being a pastor for a long time. I kind of started off as a pastor in the Sunday school era. Not that old, but I worked in traditional Baptist church, my first couple of churches, so it's traditional Sunday school. Then spent 15 or 20 years in the small group model of church. And I feel like I've seen every men's ministry, women's ministry, anything the church has done, I've seen it and probably helped plan it and carry it out. And I also have a lot of friends who are pastors, and we talk during the week. And one of the things we talk about a lot is it's not working. Not that church isn't working. People come and they worship and they hear sermons and they start their faith in Jesus. But actually like living your faith out where it actually makes a difference in people's lives, I mean, honestly, I don't know if I see that myself all the time, a lot or all the time. Right. That bugs me. That bothers me.
Yeah, me too.
And so so I left North Point December 31st, 2020, started at local church January 1, 2021. And I noticed here at local, we talked a little bit about steps, that we want people to take steps. I still am fortunate to work with, back then we had 3 churches. And so our 3 lead pastors, it's funny, we just found ourselves on the same page of like, we want to try something different. What if they preached a little different? And the steps just kind of kept coming back up and up. I mean, a lot. Also, I think I've tried from day one as a pastor not to be a typical pastor, which probably means I'm a typical pastor. I just don't want to, I don't know. I want to be normal as much as possible. Mm-hmm. But as soon as people find out I'm a pastor, they stop cussing, they don't drink, and they don't smoke. They'll do all the other bad stuff, but they cut those 3 things out. So I'm like, and I don't like that. I want people to be themselves around me. So I'm fortunate that I feel like I've had a lot of friends who, some of them aren't Christians, some of them are Christians, but they live normally around me, and their lives are messy. And honestly, I look at mine and Julie's, our marriage and my life, and I'm like, we've had some amazing things happen. We've had some not terrible, other people have had worse than us. We've had bad things happen too. And so, I don't know why that book. I felt like I just wanted to be honest about life and faith. I I feel like the faith part of the book is better than the life part. If I'm being honest, after I write, it's after that, you wrap up a project and you send it off, and then you're like, oh, I want to change 3 things about it now.
Right. Oh
Um,
yeah. I
when
know
when I
that.
when someone tells me they've bought the book, I mean, I've literally told people this: get through the life part. I hope it's good. I hope it's helpful. But what I really want you to do is get to the faith part, because I
Mm.
think that's where it gets different. And again, it's not rocket science, but I don't know. I'm answering. This is a long answer to your very easy question, but there really were about 25 factors going on around me, and most of which was honestly just going on in my own heart. Of I'm at a new church. I want us to try something different, or at least think differently about helping people grow in their faith. Life's just messy. Let's don't pretend it's not. Uh, all the small groups, Sunday school, I don't think they work. And as far as helping people follow Jesus better, um, and all these things came together. And I laugh at what the book was. When I first started writing it, I was like, that thing was a mess. And just trying to make it more and more clear over time. It just came from a lot of places. Um, jump. Side note: I've learned most pastors find my book very boring and not very helpful. Which part of me, I'm like, I hate it. It bugs me because I'm like, no, you need to buy a copy for everybody in your church. But what I've learned, I've actually reconnected to old friends, even from high school, who I think bought it to be nice. Which I'm like, I haven't seen you in 20 years. Why are you being nice? Um, and they'll message me, and then they're buying 2 copies for a friend, or they're sharing it with their friend. And I'm like, it's the people who have real lives that have moved beyond trying to pretend they get it. And I'm like, I think it's hard for that audience to find the book, but when they find it and I get feedback from them, it's your words about the book honestly are very humbling for me. It's hard for me to hear that because it's humbling but when I get those comments from people who get it, it means the world, because my one prayer through the whole writing was, please let this be helpful. Please let this be helpful. It helped me a lot. And so anyway, that's a
Yeah.
long answer to your question, but there's not a simple answer. It came from
Yeah.
a lot of places.
Yeah. I'm reading a book right now called The Good and Beautiful You.
Oh, okay.
And I just read the first chapter last night, and he actually made this statement about writing a book. He says sometimes, like if you're looking for a book to read, that the book will find you. And he says when you want to write a book, sometimes you really don't make the decision to. It's almost like the book emerges from you. And it sounds like that's kind of what happened, is like all these steps and stages through your life and all your observations. Because one thing I love about you is you're very observant. Yeah. And so all your observations just kind of created a space for this book to kind of come out of.
That was a much better, shorter way to say what I rambled on about.
You didn't ramble at all. I'm curious about why some pastors don't like it. I got an idea.
Yeah, I'd love to hear it.
And it's probably because they're not in the trenches. So, like, what I mean by the trenches is dealing with people in real life, which I'm blessed to have the opportunity to do. Yeah. And what I'm learning is even people that's been Christians a long time, and I actually did a video on this not long ago, that things can start feeling stale. Your faith can start getting stale. And so the thought is, I need to start thinking outside the box.
Yes, yeah.
And the problem with thinking outside the box is you abandon everything inside the box, but not everything inside the box needs to be abandoned.
Ooh, that's good.
And so a pastor's always looking for the new, fresh thing, right? Where your book is like I said in the beginning, it's very foundational, but in a way that I think if they really read it and put themselves in real people's shoes, they would probably have a different opinion of it.
That's good. Thank you. That's great. Thank you for that.
One thing I really appreciated about the book is you did acknowledge the tension and the struggle when it comes to life and faith.
Yeah.
And I know you focused a lot on like the emotional component of who we are. And me being a high feeler, I know so many times in my life, that's when I've gotten spun out in my faith because my feelings don't line up.
Yeah.
Right. So talk more about that. Talk about how, if we put trust in feelings when it comes to our faith in life, what usually happens?
Yeah, I feel like the church, Christians, we have a weird relationship with feelings. it's fun. We even use the terminology a lot in our churches. Feel closer to God. Feel close to Jesus. And as a pastor, I probably have said that 10,000 times. Now when I hear it, my wife's like, "Oh no, here Casey goes again." Like, what does that even mean? Feel close to God and feel close to Jesus? Like that's not like a biblical thing. So I will rant, but I'm also like, no, but I also know what it's like to sit in an auditorium in worship and you feel something. So um, I, so I feel that tension, and I learned. Uh, Gosh, multiple friends of mine working at North Point, honestly, really helped me get comfortable with tension, kind of living in the middle, having strong convictions and believing what the Bible says about something, but going real life. I love your word, in the trenches. Like that's where the tension is, in the trenches. And there's ugly and beautiful at the same time. There's difficult and easy at the same time. Um, and some of that comes from our own story. I mean, it was our first church I served in as a student pastor. We had phenomenal ministry there, phenomenal relationships, and the church loved us, celebrated us. And at the exact same time, we were going through infertility, and doctors telling us we couldn't have a baby. And I was like, but we're basically pseudo parents for all these students. And I remember just pulling the car over because I had tears in my eyes. I couldn't drive my car because I couldn't see the road anymore. So I just pulled over and like just cussing at God. And so I think I had experienced the tension. I didn't have that wording back then, but and I think this is I give God the credit for this. I remember being able to yell at God and be ticked off at him. And for some reason, pulling back onto the road going, well, I actually love God a little bit more than I did 2 minutes ago. Why do I love him a little bit more? And honestly, we'll go back to the feelings word. Why do I actually feel a little closer to him right now than I did a minute ago? And I'm still mad at him. It's not like we're pregnant all of a sudden. Um, uh, so, yeah, but and then
I've often said that honesty breeds intimacy, right?
yeah,
And I think God can handle our anger.
yeah,
And I think it's better to be angry at him and express that anger than to let that anger go into bitterness.
yeah.
You know, I've heard it said that the opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is indifference.
Wow.
And a lot of people are indifferent toward God because they had a point in their life when they were angry.
Yeah.
But they didn't feel safe enough to express that anger.
Yeah.
And so now it kind of turns into bitterness and they kind of go off the rails, right?
Yeah. But your question about feelings, I'll just look in the mirror. I think we all do. I think we all struggle with self-talk. I'm learning, I think that, or most people do. I do. And so I've learned ways to basically, I'm like a toddler. I need to be distracted from my negative self-talk or so I've learned how to distract myself from it. But forget everybody else. If I just went off my feelings throughout the day, I don't know where I'd end up at the end of the day. I don't know. I love my feelings. I grew up in a family where we didn't say I love you very much, but dang it, we knew. I mean, the love was there, and I learned as I got older to say it. That was very important. But I don't come from a real touchy-feely family, or we were real in tune with our feelings. But I think just grace, God's grace, books and people I've been around, I learned to pay attention to feelings, but also not to rely on them. And at the same time, I still, in every day, I'll catch myself feeling a certain way about myself or about someone else or a situation, and I'll try to backtrack. Why do I feel that way now? Where did that come from? So I felt like I am certainly not a counselor or any kind of feelings expert, but I know enough, being an old pastor, to know that there's a lot of people, Christians and non-Christians, who are they're gauging their life and their faith off their feelings, and that's never going to. You'll have some great moments, but overall, that's not going to be fulfilling, and that's not going. That's not what. There's nowhere in Scripture that says that's what faith is. So I worry about people who it's all about feeling close to Jesus when it comes to the faith part. So anyway, yeah, that's where it all comes from.
That's such a good response. Okay, so another thing I read in your book that I thought was very profound is what you said about expectations, because expectations, like, I know there's a place for them in the world when it comes to job, taxes, school. We can't avoid them. But my experience is, relationally speaking, expectation just kills desire, kills intimacy.
Yeah.
Most counselors will tell you that it's important to have reasonable, manageable expectations.
Yeah, yeah.
I think the goal is to have none if you want a close relationship.
Yeah.
And there's this one quote, and you're actually quoting someone else in this book, the guy that runs Woodlands.
John Estes. Yeah.
John Estes.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is what you said. The spirit of expectations is not your friend, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, like, you were making this connection between how having expectations and what that does to faith in life. Talk to me more about that.
I don't know if you have the book open. I think I say right after that, I hate that quote. I think I really did write that in the book, or if I did, I took it out. Maybe I took it out. I hate that quote. So this is about to turn into a counseling session now.
Let's go.
Okay. So I think expectations. So this is where it gets really personal for me.
Okay.
It's one of my greatest struggles, and I think it always will be. This is where I'm like, I know you called Robbie about the straw. Did you call my wife to talk about expectations?
No.
So she has this amazing ability to have no expectations. I don't know how she does. So I have this amazing God-given sense of direction. I can kind of get anywhere wherever we go. And a lot of times don't even need Google Maps, Apple Maps, or whatever I'm using. She can't get to the grocery store, it seems like, without Google Maps. And even then she questions it. She questions whether it's even right. And I'm like, what? I've learned we're just different. So the expectations, it's the opposite. She has this gift to manage expectations and even get to know expectations. I don't know how she does that. I've tried. So she and I have a relationship with someone we've had for decades, and we'll have with relationship with them for decades. They drive me nuts. They drive me crazy. They don't know that. I can smile for the time I'm around them and be polite, but when I'm not around them, my wife knows they drive me crazy. So for years, she would say, "Don't have expectations," because we realized it took me a while. I realized, I have expectations on them. Number one, they don't know about them, and number two, they can't live up to them. So that was step one. I'm embarrassed to say how many years that took to get to that point. Then Julie tried to help me have no expectations, and I tried. I couldn't get there. So this is where I'm just married really well. And again, this is embarrassingly a long amount of time this took me. So what she helped me do was to change my expectations. She's like, "Okay, Casey, you're clearly not able to get to no expectations. What can we do here?" So then I changed them. I changed them, and it was a game changer. And maybe I still need to work on having no expectations. I don't know. I'll ask you next time we have lunch at Chick-fil-A if I should work on that. But it was a game changer for me to even realize I had the ability to change my expectations, because I thought my expectations were right. Anything else would be wrong. So it changed my relationship with them. My expectations not being met stressed my wife out, because she was having to deal with me and my unmet expectations. So that's where that comes from. Yeah. Also, for many years, my wife, Julie, she would look at me and say, "Hey, I know you expect this," but she's like, "No one can read your mind." And I was like, "I hate you for saying that. And I'm so glad I married you." Because you're right. And so because my expectations live up here in my head. And I grew up mega shy. And my default is I'm very comfortable being quiet. That may not come across in this podcast, but I'm very comfortable being quiet. I'm an introvert. So in my family of origin, we were minimal words. So she knows I got expectations up in my head all the time. And if I don't verbalize them, is going to cause tension. So I'll get mad at you because you haven't met my expectation. And by the way, you didn't even know I had that expectation. That has to be the most unfair thing you can do in a relationship. And she helped me many years ago to verbalize expectations.
And in a way, this goes back to the story you told a minute ago. Now,
Uh-huh.
not perfectly, because God did know your expectations.
Yes.
But you had expectations on God,
Mhm.
which I think is very normal.
Yeah.
By the way, certain personality types sets us up for expectations more than others.
Yep. I'm
Really,
raising my hand. I've got it.
it really does. I have the personality type where I don't struggle with them all that much.
Yeah.
There are some, the Enneagram 3,
That's what I am. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And I don't know how much red you have in you on the temperament.
I have 20 something. I have a lot of
Okay,
it.
yeah. So you are set up for expectations.
Yeah.
So I think Jesus meets us where we are in our expectations, right?
Yeah.
But like you had expectations on God. And even though he knew what was in your heart, once you express those, like, hey, God, you're not meeting my expectations. We want a kid.
Yeah.
And you're not meeting my expectations. Just you able to express that, even though you probably didn't use those words,
Mhm.
you automatically felt closer to God and you were experiencing him more. So, and it makes me wonder, and I don't want to go too far down a trail here, but I think a lot of times we can have expectations on God because we think he's promised things that he has not.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and this may be another conversation you and I can have in another podcast, but
well, it's the formula. I'm terrible at math, but we all love a good formula. And
Sure.
So if I do what I think God wants me to do, my expectation is he will give me what I want or what I deserve. And
there's the word.
That's not
Mhm.
that's not God. That's not part of the promise.
Right.
So yes, totally agree with what you're saying, and have living proof right here.
Yeah. All right. This is another quote
Okay.
from is it Kierkegaard? Because you even admit in the book you don't know how to
Oh,
pronounce it.
Kierkegaard.
That guy, the German guy. You quoted him, and this is fascinating. Life can only be understood backward, but it must be lived forward.
Yeah.
Talk to me how that plays into life and faith.
So it's funny. I anybody who knows me really well would tell you I don't memorize things well. That's why I didn't do well. I was the most average student ever. I don't do plays or dramas because I can't memorize lines. Like it's I think I have a little dyslexia. That's what I blame for it. I think I have some of that. I heard that quote probably in like 1998 or so, and have never forgotten it. And that's why when you read it, when you said it, I'm like, oh wow, like that. It has always stood out to me. I think because it helped me make sense of life. Because the way I learned the quote, and I think even when I researched the quote, it was kind of like, well, no one exactly knows what he said, but here's basically the gist of it. But life must be lived forward, but you can only understand it looking backwards. And I think I resonated with it because it just made sense to me. But we want everything to make sense as it's happening, or in the present, and maybe even in the future. This is the plan. This is what will happen. And I just knew that, at least for me, that wasn't the case. And so that we can, the fact that we can, and even I don't know if he's right exactly. I don't know that can we really understand it looking backwards? I don't know, but it does make more sense looking backwards. And so, I think that it just resonated with me because it was truth. It connected to what I had experienced in life then. I was a lot younger then, but it made sense to me then. And as a pastor, I get a front row seat to a lot of people's lives. I think I noticed that was one of the big struggles everybody was facing. Especially Christians, because God's will is so important to us, but it's so mystical and magical. And where is it? And how do I know? And I'm doing God's will today, but what about tomorrow? And so part of that, when the word understanding, and Christians especially, we want to understand life. We think that's part of what being a Christian means and God's will. But I just didn't see that lining up with people's lives, real lives, and my own life. But we can look back, and sometimes I think we can understand things. But at least when we look back, we can make sense of some things. So there's a little more. I don't think it's not clear, but there is a little more clarity. There's less fog when we look backwards. So yeah, anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I just thought about Paul when he wrote to the Philippians. He basically almost gave us his history. You know, born Pharisee, studied under the feet of Gamaliel. I think that's how you pronounce his name. All this stuff, you know, student of the law. So he kind of looked backwards and then immediately said, pressing forward toward the mark.
Yeah.
You know, so it's almost like Paul, who I think would have been an amazing counselor.
Yeah.
He almost understood, like, I'm going to give you my background and let you know I understand my background before I can even encourage you to look forward.
Yeah. Well, this was not in the book, I don't think at all, but even as you're talking, I'm thinking, I think that's why it's funny when I sit down with people, my lunch meetings tend to go longer than I plan. I probably did that with you.
I love it.
But I'm a context person. I like context, and part of me, even if it's I don't know, even if I know the agenda, we're meeting to talk about a certain subject, I want a little bit of context about you so that I can kind of understand where you're coming from. Why are you talking that way or not talking that way? And it's funny, I think I want a little bit of your past so that I can understand you. So even though it's not my past, it's your past, if you can share it with me a little bit, I can understand you a little bit more. And then we can go faster in our relationship and connection. That's funny. I've never connected that with that quote and with Paul, but that's very much.
It's cool. Been my experience. Like any meaningful relationship I've ever developed, we did not bond well until I heard your story.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, until I heard your story, we're just the level of bonding was going to be limited.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah, that's true.
Here, the next thing I want to talk about is this, because man, I see this a lot in counseling. Okay. People come in all the time and, you know, what is your goal for counseling? Well, I'm so negative and I want to be more positive. And I get it. I absolutely understand. It feels better to be positive.
Yeah, yeah.
But a lot of times Christians will confuse having faith with thinking in a positive way, positively thinking. Flesh that out for me.
Man, that's good stuff. That's good. Yes. It's funny you say that. I'm like, because it's funny. I think it depends on who I'm around, whether I'm the positive person in the room or the negative person in the room. I work with a lot of, you mentioned the temperament assessment earlier. They're yellows tend to, they're parties, the fun people. They are almost always positive. One of the guys I get to work with here, who's like a rock star lead pastor for us, he's a bright yellow. Recently, he had some challenges at his church, and he sat down with me and he was like, "I'm mad." And I was like, I was like, "Okay, yeah, you should be." And he was like, "No. I don't know what it's like to be mad. I don't like being mad, but I'm mad." And he's like, "I'm struggling with being mad." And so he was telling me I'm just frustrated, and I was like, "You're describing me every day. That's how I feel on a normal day." He's like, "This is what it's like to be a red?" And I was like, "Yeah." I said, "I can't imagine not be." I said, "I've always got three things I'm bothered by at all times. Just depends on if you want to hear about them or not." And it was funny that we kind of shared back and forth what it's like to, you know, this is how you manage being mad about a situation. And we had a lot of fun around it. At the same time, we learned a lot about each other. But to your question, God, I don't know where this stuff comes from, but again, being around church for a long time and so many Christians for a long time, there's something in us that, and I don't know, this isn't biblical, or we take a verse and we make it mean more. But the idea that Christians are supposed to be positive all the time, we're supposed to be happy all the time, and what that means is if we're not, then we're sinning. God's not happy. God's not happy with us anymore. We're doing something wrong in His eyes. And it's like, number one, that's not biblical. And number two, you go back to wiring and how we're all made. And so, but I do think it's and a lot of times when people start their faith in Jesus, they kind of expect life to get great all of a sudden. And again, going back to what we've kind of started off with, life's different. Life just, I think I used the word complicated. Life's just really complicated, and good and bad run on say parallel tracks, I think almost all the time. And if you're running on and if you have no bad, just wait a day or two, bad will show up. And then if everything's bad, wait a day or two, some good will show up. And so but the idea that again, it goes back to feelings. If we're basing our life and faith off of an emotion or happiness or positivity, you're going to be disappointed in your life and in your faith, and you're going to be disappointed for the wrong reason, for reasons you can't fix.
Yeah.
So if you're always chasing positivity, even my bright yellow friend, who's the most positive person I know, he knows, even if that's what he's chasing and measuring each day by, even for him who's 98% positive, he's going to go home thinking today was disappointing. I failed. I'm not even doing my faith right, because I should be positive if I have good faith in Jesus. And so thankfully for him, he knows that those are all lies. But yeah, it's just this thing we're chasing that's.
Yeah. And I think the danger is if we are trying to approach life by saying, okay, it's very important that I always think positive and that's going to equal a happy life, what we do is end up putting our faith in our faith, right?
Yeah.
And instead of putting our faith in Christ, and that means I trust you good times and bad times, we end up putting our faith in our faith, right?
That's good.
And I started thinking about 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He talked about the difference between the power of positive thinking and proactive thinking.
Yeah.
So the power of positive thinking, which I do not subscribe to, is ignore the negative and just focus on the positive.
Yeah.
Which is what so many Christians try to do, right?
Yeah.
But proactive thinking is, yes, we acknowledge the negative. It's real. The tension is real.
Yeah.
We just don't want to always live there, and eventually we want to shift to the positive, right?
Yeah.
So I call it the holy but.
Yeah.
You're having the right things on the right side of the word but.
Yeah. That's
So,
good.
okay, this is my problem, but God.
Yeah.
Instead of, okay, well, I know God's good and I know God's in control and all of it, but here's my tragedy.
Yeah.
So the wrong thing's on the wrong side of the word but. And I think about Psalms 13, where David, basically, God, how long are you going to forget me? How long are you going to forsake me? How long are you going to turn your face from me?
Yeah.
He was gut level honest, but then he said, but I trust in your loving kindness, right?
Gosh, that's good.
So I think that's kind of how faith, trust, and negativity and positivity could kind of marry together. I just know it's so common for people to want to ignore the negative, like it's not there.
Yeah.
No, and that's not faith. It's just simply not.
Well, and I feel like I don't know. I'm thinking back to your question earlier about feelings, and I'm hoping I didn't come across saying ignore feelings are bad, ignore them, because as you're talking, there's this thing it's so healthy to acknowledge I'm feeling this right now. I'm feeling this, and sometimes ask the question, how did I get here? Why do I feel this way? And it's kind of that parallel track. Feelings can be dangerous. Don't base your life and faith off of that. And at the same time, pay attention to your feelings. How are you feeling? Where did they come from? And they can really help you in your life and faith. But gosh, yeah, that's really good. Really good.
Yeah. All right. Here's one thing I really want to settle in on.
Okay.
Because I loved this line. Because I run into so many people that need to really understand this.
Mm-hmm.
The church is trying its best.
Yeah.
I loved that section in your book because, it's almost like this. It's like we just talked about, putting your faith in your faith.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people, their faith is in the church, right?
Yep.
And when the church lets them down, they throw the baby out with the bathwater, deconstruct.
Yeah.
Whatever that means right now.
Yeah,
turn their back on it. So because you've been in the church world a long, long time.
Yeah.
Talk to me more about that the church is trying its best. Why is it important that people understand that?
I think I've always known that, partly because I'm on a church staff trying my best. But I'll tell you where I learned to say it that way. The last 2 years, I worked at North Point Community Church. The senior pastor, Andy Stanley, was my boss. So we were in meetings together a couple times a week. Every meeting, we would start off by praying. And whenever Andy was praying, almost every time he would pray something like, God, we're trying our best. We want to do the best we can. And after a while, I was like, okay, he prays that a lot. That's important to him. And I also thought, there's a lot of humility in that prayer. And at the same time, he's acknowledging reality. We're humans. we're just trying our best, God. We're trusting you, but we also know we have to be active we got to lead this church. We got to pastor this church. So I think the wording for that came honestly from hearing him pray that a lot. And I mean, you've been around church a long time. Also, I've seen some churches do some dumb, hurtful, evil. I've seen some evil things done by the church.
Oh yeah.
I won't go that. I won't give them the benefit of the doubt that they were trying their best. But I know a lot of pastors, and I do know a couple guys that I'm like, I don't know how God even allowed them to be a pastor. But that's a whole other podcast. That's a different podcast.
I love it.
I'll have to black my face out and not mention names for that one.
Just don't mention names, but
yeah,
please keep going.
Right. Some good stories. But most of the guys, men and women I know who are pastors, they really are trying their best. Their sermons, they want every week to be their best sermon. Their Bible studies, their programs, their events, they really are trying their best. And I think it feels, but working for a church, I'm also very aware of the criticisms we receive.
Oh yeah.
Emails, gossip, the neighborhood pool conversation that happens, just to walk up in the lobby, direct feedback you get sometimes. And I don't know, and I get it. Church is complicated. I don't know why Jesus left the church in our hands. I'll never understand that.
What was he thinking?
I don't want to second guess Jesus, but I'm second guessing Jesus on that one. But I'm also like, okay, he's Jesus. He knows what he was doing. This was his plan. So I feel that tension of, I understand people look at the church differently than they look at their favorite restaurant, let's say, because it's the church. It's the thing Jesus established. It's where somebody stands in front of you and says, here's what the Bible says. Let's go try to live this together. It's where we gather with people and music is played and we sing together. That doesn't happen anywhere else in our lives. So I get that people go back to expectations. I get that people have different expectations of their church. They should, I guess. At the same time, it gets lost in that the people are the people running this church are normal people. We had a moment this past Sunday at our church. Our senior pastor Chris Emmett is about to it's the last worship song. Our worship leader that day was a guy named Casey, not me, thank God. To set up the song to set up the last song, he kind of just got real vulnerable with the church, with the mic and the guitar in his hand. The lights are all there. He's supposed to do like a 1-minute setup for the song, and he does a longer setup. But he had a friend die the week before, and he had some other stuff happening in his life. He didn't go into great detail, which was appropriate, but he just talked about how life is difficult. And then he led the song beautifully. I think people leaned in and were saying louder because of his vulnerability. Well, then Chris Emmett, our senior pastor, got up there to start the sermon, and he stopped and he said, "Hey, before I start the sermon," he said, "I want to thank Casey for doing what he just did. That was a vulnerable moment for him." And he kind of said, "Hey, the band, the singers, me, your pastor, your preacher, we're just people, and good and bad things happen to us as well. And we try our best when we get up here to lead the songs well, to have a great sermon." He said, "But I just want you to know, like, you attend a church that's led by normal people." Now, I know our culture off stage. We very much believe, I know when I signed up to be a pastor, I do believe I signed up for some higher standards. You should hold me to that. That doesn't feel pressure. I understand the calling I have. But it was, I think I've told Chris 2 times this week, like, that was beautiful. Beautiful for Casey that you validated what he said. Beautiful for you to say that to our church. But I said, I think people, and I knew a couple of people in the audience. There was a friend of mine who had been in church in years who was in the room at that moment. And I thought, yes, that's what I want him to hear from our church. I don't know if they'll ever come back, but I'm just I think because I sit in the seat as a pastor, we don't have all the answers. I don't know. My job has kind of turned into a big job. We want to create 20 or 30 churches over the next 10 years. I love it. I think God's wired me for that. Is it going to happen? I don't know. I know me really well. we're going to try hard, and we're going to create some plans. I don't know. I know where I'm capable of messing that up. I think I bring some things to the table to help with that too. But I also know we're just going to try our best, and that's all. So, I mean, I've been fortunate. Almost every church I've worked in, we've never used those words, but I've been really fortunate to work at churches that allowed us to be pretty normal people, and that. So, again, the wording comes from Andy. I think just hearing him pray that over and over and really mean it, but also just knowing that behind the scenes at a church, we really are trying our best. And I think I don't know if people will ever understand that, but I do think when they get that, there's some grace there.
Yeah.
I think you might listen to your pastor your preacher a little bit more. Not being a preacher, I feel like I can endorse preachers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you'd lean in a little bit more when you realize it's a normal guy. I'm not to brag on Chris. Well, I'll brag on Chris one more time. He's not here, so he can't hear me. Chris shares stories. All three of our lead pastors, Chris, Brian, and Nathan, and Ben, all four of our lead pastors, when they preach, they share a lot of personal stories. A lot of them are funny, self-deprecating stories. And there's mostly they share those because that's them. They are share story guys. There's also a little bit of a strategy there. When you share those stories, people see you, they realize they're already seen as preachers, and there's a wall between myself and a preacher because you're better than me and you're more spiritual than me. But when I share these stories, and I share stories about how I messed up as a parent, or that my kids are just like your kids, all of a sudden, you start to see that person preaching as kind of a normal person.
Yeah.
And I think you lean in more. There's some credibility there. So, yeah, that's yeah. At the end of the day, though, I am the most normal person there ever was, and I'm just aware. I'm very aware. I'm trying my best, and so that's where that comes from.
Yeah. So let me ask you this question.
Yeah.
For the person that thinks so like, let's say I have a client comes in, they have this problem, they go through this experience where Jesus begins to heal wounds, meet needs. What I've experienced is no matter what Jesus does for them as far as healing and growth here, if they do not have, we'll just say church or something, some kind of community, then they're kind of dead in the water. It's like what you just experienced is it's not sustainable because God has not created us, to be alone. So let's say you got somebody watching this podcast right now who has the mentality, I don't need church.
Yeah.
What would your response be as far as faith in life? And they say, I just don't need church.
Yeah, you're talking about several of my family members.
Okay.
My brother is that. So we've had that conversation before. I feel like I probably am too honest sometimes, or maybe that's not such a thing. I'm going to be honest all the time, I hope. I've told family and friends who've asked me that question, there's a part of me that goes, you don't need church to trust Jesus more, to grow your faith. So there is a part of me that, because I do think that this has kind of been my journey the last even couple of years, and a little bit of where the book comes from. Yes, those things will help your faith, but I'm almost distinguishing between your personal faith in Jesus. You can grow that. You can trust Jesus more on your own. I actually think you should do more of that. Do actions that cause you to trust Jesus more. So there's a part of me that goes, okay, I'll meet you where you're at.
Sure.
You don't need church for everything. But then there's the flip side of that goes, yeah, you need church because number one, Jesus, it was his idea. I think he knows more than we do. I'm going to say he does. So even if you don't think you do, you just need to show up because Jesus created it for people who have faith in Jesus. So at the most basic level, just obey Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Then you can get into the details. Well, then he also gives you gifts when you put your faith in Jesus. He gives you gifts, and I feel like the whole idea of gifts and passions and all that kind of stuff has kind of become this wild west of chasing things. But to me, at the core of gifts from God is He made you good at things, and the church needs those things. He gave you those things to make the church better. So not only do you need to attend church, the church needs you to attend because you have gifts that the church needs. What does that look like? I don't know. Kind of depends on what church you go to and what their needs are and all that kind of stuff. But and it's funny that the word community it's become a loaded word to me, especially in the church world. And honestly, part of it's because of my North Point background. We use that word to mean community groups. I think I think every Christian needs some Christian friends who will pray for them, celebrate with them, grieve with them, hold them accountable. I don't think that's the point of the church. I don't think that's my job or the church's job to give you those friends, but I think you've got to have them. But I do think you need community. It's funny, you know this about me. I spend way too much time at Chick-fil-A during the week. It's embarrassing. We don't need to go there. How many hours I spend in a Chick-fil-A. My go-to Chick-fil-A is close to our house. And anybody listening to this may just hit stop at this point, but I have meaningful community at that Chick-fil-A. They know I'm a pastor. I tried to hide it for a long time, and then one of my friends found out, and so that's what she calls me now there. And I told her to stop, and she won't stop.
Blew your cover.
She blew my cover. But also I've gotten to know some of them. Like I have meaningful conversations there. I know some of the people who come. I know there are other frequent people who come there. I feel like, now, do we go deep? No. But when I walk into that place, do I feel like it's one of my places, that I belong there? I do. It's funny, when I'm not there several days in a row, when I come in, they ask, where you been? What's been going on? And I'm like, oh, you're checking up on me. Now, I will admit, it's more surfacey unless they let me know they want to go further. But and then and then I have 3 dudes. One of them is not my dude anymore because you called him and he ratted me out on the straw thing. So I'll cut him out of my life after this. So I still got two dudes, but now I've got 3 guys that I meet with. It's funny, 2 of them know each other, but I meet with them one-on-one, and that's community for me. I mean, I don't know if this is good or not. I view my family as part of my community. I'm very fortunate to have a healthy, normal, healthy family. We've got our own issues, but they're healthy people for me. So going back to the church thing, even I would just, at the most basic level, I don't know exactly why you need church, but Jesus said you need church.
Yeah.
And
I think
you should do it.
Yeah, that's kind of where I always default to, because like when I get the question why, like I'll tell people, listen, you need church, you need a group, it's all about the coming together.
Yeah.
That's why Jesus made the church, because there's certain needs that we have that I believe that God primarily only meets for other people.
Yes, I agree.
And so if you're not gathering together in that spiritual community to worship, to learn, to grow, to share, then there is a lack there. And I'm not legalistic with it. I'm not like, okay, listen, if you don't go to church, you're going to get cursed, or your mouth's going to go into shit. No, it's just the spiritual path you're on.
Yeah.
The growth you're experiencing is not going to continue alone.
Yeah.
Right? It's just not going to continue alone. So I think that need that God put in us, I believe Jesus created the church for that reason.
I do. The flip side of that, the most frightening place for me to ever find anyone is isolation. When I see you alone, or I notice or hear somebody's story and I pick up on isolation or loneliness, that scares me. I know that's where the bad things happen or can happen. So that's part of it. I also notice, I don't know if this is a cultural shift. I've been at local church for 2.5 years now. One of the best things, and this happens at all 3 of our churches currently that we have, and they're all different sizes, different communities. People are looking for community. Now, I think the church used to define community smaller, as a community group, 10 people, 15 people. What I'm observing, and I don't know if this is true or not, at least I think it's true at our churches, they want the church to be a community. They want, so we, one of our churches, we have some turf areas that we put some games out on. It's not uncommon for me and our senior pastor to stand in the lobby, just next to each other and look at each other and go, no one wants to talk to us. They're not lining up to talk to the pastors today. They're hanging out with each other. They're playing. The kids are playing the games. You see people hugging. I've watched people over in the corner praying together. But it's mostly just hanging out, talking. And I don't know that they're talking about the sermon that day. I mean, maybe they are. They're probably just talking about this, what's going on. But this desire and the need to be together. And I think the fact that it happens at church, which is very important to them because they're at church, I think there's just something really meaningful about being with people at church that I'm still learning, I'm still observing it, but there's something special there.
This is a can of worms that we might not want to fully open today, but here's what I find fascinating about what you say.
Yeah.
Is the typical church models over, let's say, the past 20 years has almost set us up to not do that on Sundays at the church.
Totally.
So you go to church on Sundays, and that's where the pep rally happens and and the message happens. Now go to your community groups to bond, share, pray. But what you're witnessing is if you just kind of step back and let people do their thing, it starts happening on Sundays on the ground, on the church grounds naturally. That's fascinating, and I would love to. That may be podcast number 2 for me and you.
Just let me know. I got lots of ideas. They're still new, but I think you just worded it way better than I did. I think there's something there, and I was a part of. I mean, literally helping design physical buildings of churches that intentionally and sometimes unintentionally did not allow that space to happen, but we also believe people didn't want that. It was they want to get in and out. And this was not just when I worked at like big churches. This was even some other smaller churches I worked at years ago, where now this is at a church that one church averages 100 adults, one 500, one 1,000, in a different I just see it, and I step back and go, these people, they would they would typically line up to talk to the preacher. I want to talk to the preacher, shake his hand. And I'm like, you could stand here all day. I don't think people want to talk to you. And because they want community. That's fast. Oh, yeah. You just let me know when you want to talk about it. It'll be a lot of I thinks and I've observed. But I think there's something there. And that I would even go into even some of, what the step of me even coming to local church was a part of that story. And that I think that's where we're going to be going for the next 10 years or so. So, we can return to that if you would like.
I love it. Casey, thank you so much for doing this. Tell people where they can find your book. I know it's on Amazon because that's where I got it. Where books are sold?
Anywhere books are sold online. No physical stores. I'm not that popular or that good, really. So anywhere you can buy them online. Amazon's always the easiest place. But that's awesome. Thanks for letting me share about the book.
Oh man, Casey, I have really, really enjoyed this conversation, and I really do hope it's not our last. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate it too. It was fun.
Right. Thanks.
Thanks, man.